Chapter 29. The young man named Cheng Mingxiang, who was standing in the middle, smiled and said, "There's no way I'd miss such a good show." Cheng Mingxiang glanced at Genshin as a look of disdain appeared on his face. He said disdainfully, "You're probably Changyang Shoten, right?" "That's right, young Master Cheng. He's the Changyang Shoten who injured the four of us," Carl hurriedly answered as soon as Cheng Mingxiang finished speaking. Cheng Mingxiang nodded slightly and said arrogantly, "Changyang Shoten, you're not bad. You even dared to hit the person I'm protecting." Cheng Mingxiang's voice became deeper and deeper as he spoke. Genshin already knew that the other party was a group of unreasonable hedonistic young masters. It was useless to reason with them. The only way was to use strength to speak. Thinking to this point, Genshin did not waste any more words with them. He coldly snorted and said, "So what if I hit you? If you're not convinced, then go ahead and attack. There's no need to talk so much nonsense." Hearing Genshin's words, Cheng Mingxiang's face gradually turned ashen. He angrily said, "Good, good, good. Then let me see just how capable you are." With that, Cheng Mingxiang's body flashed and crossed the distance of nearly 10 meters in the blink of an eye. He arrived in front of Genshin and directly punched at Genshin's nose. Cheng Mingxiang did not plan on using a saint weapon to deal with a new student who was not even a saint yet. Genshin also knew that Cheng Mingxiang was much stronger than Genshin. The difference in saint force between them was too great, so Genshin did not choose to receive Cheng Mingxiang's attack head-on. Just as Cheng Mingxiang's fist was about to land on Genshin's head, Genshin tilted his head slightly and dodged it by a hair's breadth. At the same time, Genshin instantly raised his arms and grabbed Cheng Mingxiang's arm. He then lowered his waist and straightened his back, pulling Cheng Mingxiang's arm back with both hands. Cheng Mingxiang's center of gravity was already tilted forward when he threw the punch. Now that Genshin was pulling him, his body immediately tilted forward uncontrollably. However, Cheng Mingxiang reacted very quickly. He immediately took a step forward and leaned back, trying his best to control his body. However, at this moment, Genshin suddenly let go of Cheng Mingxiang's arm. Both of his hands formed palms and slammed into Cheng Mingxiang's chest as fast as lightning. Cheng Mingxiang's center of gravity was already tilted to the back. Now that he received Genshin's almost full force attack, he immediately began to stagger backwards. Looking at the momentum of his retreat, it was as if he could lose his balance and fall to the ground at any time. After retreating more than 10 meters, Cheng Mingxiang finally stabilized his body. However, at this moment, his face had already turned the color of pig liver, gloomy and dark. His eyes were filled with hatred as he looked at Genshin. With his status, he was one of the top powerhouses in the academy. At this moment, he actually suffered such a big loss in the hands of someone who was much weaker than him and had not even reached the Saint Realm. How could he not feel angry? If this matter were to spread in Kargath Academy, not only would he lose face, but he would also become a huge laughingstock. Thinking of this, Cheng Mingxiang could not help but feel a killing intent towards Genshin. Because for him, this was absolutely an unacceptable humiliation. At this moment, the surroundings had already become deathly silent. Everyone, including Luo Jian, had a dull expression on their faces. Their gazes towards Genshin were filled with astonishment, shock, and disbelief. This result was clearly out of everyone's expectations. No one would have thought that Cheng Mingxiang, who had been famous in Kargath Academy for a long time and was known as a cultivation genius, would suffer such a huge loss in just a short exchange of blows with someone who hadn't even reached the Saint Realm. Moreover, he appeared to be in an extremely sorry state. Cheng Mingxiang's face was gloomy as he stared fiercely at Genshin. Then, a silver-white two-handed sword gradually appeared in his hand. He shouted angrily, "Changyang Shoten, today I will definitely cripple you." After saying that, Cheng Mingxiang rushed towards Genshin with the silver-white two-handed sword in his hand. "Stop!" Just as Cheng Mingxiang moved, a deep voice suddenly sounded from outside. Then, a rather sturdy and dark-skinned young man slowly walked in. When Genshin saw this sturdy young man, a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. This was because this person was the man with innate divine strength that he had met in the freshman competition. When Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang's gaze fell on Tai Ta, their faces changed slightly and a trace of fear appeared in their eyes. Luo Yun did not recognize Tai Ta. He shouted at Tai Ta arrogantly, "Who are you? It's best if you don't meddle in the matters between our young master and young Master Cheng. Otherwise, don't blame, shut up." Without waiting for Luo Yun to finish his words, Luo Jian suddenly shouted and interrupted Luo Yun. Ignoring the stunned Luo Yun, Luo Jian's face hung a trace of a smile. He slightly cupped his hands towards Tai Ta and said with a smile, "So it's Brother Tai Ta. I wonder what brings Brother Tai Ta here." Tai Ta looked at Luo Jian strangely and said in a low muffled voice, "Who are you? I don't know you." Tai Ta then ignored the unsightly Luo Jian and directly walked to Jianshan's side. He raised his hand and fiercely patted Jianshan's shoulder. He laughed and said, "Changyang Shoten, I didn't expect to meet you here. I haven't seen you for several days." Jianshan smiled slightly and said, "Tai Ta, let's talk later. Let me deal with this troublesome matter first." Hearing this, Tai Ta's gaze slowly swept across Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian's group. He then pointed at them and said in a low muffled voice, "Changyang Shoten, did they bully you?" "You can say that." Jianshan slowly crossed his arms in front of his chest and said indifferently. Hearing this, Tai Ta immediately rolled up his sleeves and looked fiercely at the group opposite him. He said loudly, "Changyang Shoten is my brother. If you bully him, you bully me. If anyone wants to fight me, stand out. You may be stronger than me, but I, Tai Ta, am not afraid of you." Hearing Tai Ta's words, Jianshan was slightly stunned. He looked at Tai Ta with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand when he became Tai Ta's brother. Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian's expressions slightly changed. They looked at each other and saw a trace of dignified expression in each other's eyes. Obviously, they were deeply afraid of Tai Ta. Although Tai Ta's strength wasn't strong and they could easily defeat him, Tai Ta had a powerful backer behind him that even they were afraid of. This was why they didn't dare to touch Tai Ta in the slightest in Kargath Institute. They didn't speak again. Carl, Luo Yun, and Luo Jian could see that Tai Ta's identity wasn't ordinary from Luo Jian's attitude. Therefore, they were very smart and didn't say anything. For a moment, the atmosphere around them became a little strange. After a moment of silence, it was Luo Jian who broke the silence. "Brother Tai Ta, this is a matter between us and Changyang Shoten. I hope you won't interfere." Luo Jian's tone was extremely polite. He knew that although Tai Ta was born a commoner, his current status was no weaker than his own. In fact, Tai Ta's status was even slightly higher than his. Even if he became the head of the Luo family in the future, he would only be able to maintain an equal status with Tai Ta. Luo Jian's words shocked all the students in the library. Many of the older students recognized Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang. They knew that not only were they powerful, but they also had a huge clan behind them. However, the two of them were actually so polite to Tai Ta, who had appeared out of nowhere. This made all the students in the library guess at Tai Ta's identity. They wondered just what kind of background Tai Ta had to make the arrogant Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang, who were usually so arrogant in the academy, so afraid of him. Unfortunately, Tai Ta didn't appreciate their kindness at all. He said without giving them any face, "I've already said that Changyang Shoten is my brother. His matters are my matters. If there's anything, just come at me." Luo Jian's expression changed slightly when he heard that. His eyes became slightly stern. He really didn't dare to offend Tai Ta too much. At this moment, the gloomy Cheng Mingxiang coldly snorted. He glared at Tai Ta and said in a deep voice, "Tai Ta, are you really going to interfere in this matter?" After suffering a big loss at the hands of Jianshan, Cheng Mingxiang already hated Jianshan. Being forced into such a difficult situation by a freshman who hadn't even reached the Saint Realm was definitely a great humiliation for Cheng Mingxiang. If he couldn't wash it off, then he wouldn't be able to stay in the academy in the future. "That's right, I'm going to interfere." Tai Ta's expression darkened as he shouted loudly. Although he knew that Cheng Mingxiang was very strong, Tai Ta didn't show the slightest fear. Jianshan pulled Tai Ta and said, "Tai Ta, this is between me and them. Don't interfere. Otherwise, it'll bring you a lot of trouble." A trace of anger flashed through Tai Ta's eyes. He suddenly turned his head to look at Jianchen. He frowned and said unhappily, "Chang Shoten, what are you saying? Do you think I'm afraid of trouble? Do you still treat me as a friend?" Jianchen couldn't help but feel puzzled when he heard that. He didn't know when he had such a close relationship with Tai Ta. It seemed that they hadn't even met many times. The only place where they had some interaction was at the freshman competition. Tai Ta, since you're asking for trouble, don't blame me. Don't think that I won't dare to touch you just because you're the principal's disciple. Let me see how capable the principal's disciple is. Cheng Mingxiang directly charged at Tai Ta. Hearing Cheng Mingxiang's words, Jianchen was slightly surprised. He didn't expect Tai Ta to actually become the principal's disciple. If this news were to spread throughout the academy, it would probably set off a frenzied wave. At this time, Cheng Mingxiang had already arrived in front of Tai Ta and directly punched at Tai Ta's chest. Due to Tai Ta's special status, Cheng Mingxiang didn't dare to really hurt him. This punch only used 50% of his strength. In his opinion, even with 50% of his strength, it wasn't something that Tai Ta, who hadn't even advanced to the Saint Realm, could withstand. Chapter 30. Bang! Tai Ta and Cheng Mingxiang's fist collided with a muffled sound. Their fists separated as soon as they came into contact, and the strong recoil caused both of them to quickly retreat. Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly when he sensed the power in Tai Ta's punch. He looked at Tai Ta in surprise. Although Tai Ta was not a saint, even a saint would not be able to unleash the power in that punch. If it weren't for the fact that Cheng Mingxiang was so much stronger than Tai Ta, he would have been at a disadvantage in that clash. But even so, Cheng Mingxiang's entire right arm was aching faintly. Cheng Mingxiang moved his right arm slightly. Now, his gaze toward Tai Ta had changed a little. He thought to himself, the principal's disciple is really not simple. The power contained in his punch is actually so terrifying. It completely suppressed my punch with 50% of my strength. If it were an ordinary saint, he would probably be at a disadvantage in the face of Tai Ta's punch. Tai Ta was born with divine strength. His strength was unbelievably great. No one of his peers dared to compare with him. Apart from that, Tai Ta's body was also terrifyingly strong. Even Jianchen was amazed. Tai Ta was not injured at all in the clash with Cheng Mingxiang. Tai Ta laughed excitedly and roared, "Come again. Have a good fight with me." With that, Tai Ta raised his fist and charged toward Cheng Mingxiang again. Cheng Mingxiang frowned slightly when he saw Tai Ta charging toward him again. He then signaled to Luo Jian and said in a low voice, "Tai Ta, I'll deal with Tai Ta. I'll keep Tai Ta busy. Go teach Changyang Xiangtian a lesson." With that, Cheng Mingxiang charged at Tai Ta and began an intense battle with him. Because of Tai Ta's special status, Cheng Mingxiang did not dare to use his saint weapon. He directly used his fists to fight Tai Ta. However, after a few rounds, Cheng Mingxiang began to complain in his heart. Tai Ta's strength was just too abnormal. His body was as hard as steel. Without using his saint weapon, fighting Tai Ta was like fighting a moving steel fortress. The strength of his body and that terrifying strength had completely made up for Tai Ta's lack of saint force. Although Cheng Mingxiang's saint force was much stronger than Tai Ta's, without using his saint weapon, he could not do anything to Tai Ta. Towards the end, he gradually began to use his full strength. Even so, he could only barely suppress Tai Ta. Moreover, he did not dare to clash with Tai Ta's fists for too long. Seeing Tai Ta fighting with Cheng Mingxiang so intensely, some of the students in the library who knew Cheng Mingxiang's identity opened their eyes wide in disbelief. Although many of them had never seen Tai Ta before, many of them had heard of his name. After all, Tai Ta had obtained second place in the new student competition. Although he was not very famous in the academy, there were many people who knew his name. It was really hard for them to imagine that a new student who had not yet advanced to the Saint Realm actually had such powerful strength. He was actually evenly matched with Cheng Mingxiang, who had already advanced to the Saint Realm and was known as a cultivation genius in Kargath Academy. The news that the champion of the freshman competition, Changyang Xiangtian, was able to defeat Ka Diyun, who had just broken through to the Saint realm, with just 80% of his Saint force was shocking enough. But now, Tai Ta, who had clearly not broken through to the Saint realm, was actually able to fight to a draw with Cheng Mingxiang, one of the top experts in Kargath Academy. To them, this news was absolutely unacceptable. While Cheng Mingxiang and Tai Ta were fighting intensely, Luo Jian was not idle either. He rushed towards Genshin. Luo Jian did not use his Saint weapon. With his strength as an intermediate Saint, he disdained to use his Saint weapon against someone who had not yet become a Saint. Luo Jian quickly rushed in front of Genshin. Without giving Genshin time to prepare, he quickly kicked out with his right leg towards Genshin's stomach. Luo Jian's kick was fast and ruthless. He did not hold back at all. He did not care about Genshin at all. Although Luo Jian's kick was very fast, he still underestimated Genshin's reflexes and dodging speed. Just as Luo Jian's kick was about to hit Genshin's body, Genshin moved slightly to the side. Luo Jian's leg brushed past Genshin's clothes. Although Genshin seemed to have dodged Luo Jian's attack by a hair's breadth, there was no trace of panic on his face. He was completely calm. Seeing that his attack had missed, a trace of surprise appeared in Luo Jian's eyes. However, in the next moment, Azure Saint Force immediately surged out of his body. As soon as the Azure Saint Force appeared, a faint breeze mysteriously appeared around Luo Jian's body. Genshin was surprised when he sensed the breeze that had suddenly appeared around Luo Jian. According to what he had read in the books, this phenomenon was clearly the manifestation of wind-attributed Saint Force. Saint Force with an attribute was usually much more powerful than Saint Force without an attribute. Moreover, there would be additional abilities contained within the attribute depending on the attribute. People with wind-attributed Saint Force were definitely much faster. It was very difficult for people with the same level of strength to surpass people with wind-attributed Saint Force in terms of speed. As soon as the Azure Saint Force appeared, Luo Jian's right fist was wrapped in Azure Saint Force and struck towards Genshin's face at an extremely fast speed. This punch was extremely fast. Wherever it passed, it was like a phantom. It was impossible for the naked eye to catch it. Genshin had a serious expression on his face. He tilted his head slightly and dodged Luo Jian's punch. Following that, he suddenly kicked out with his right leg, kicking towards Luo Jian's body with a speed that was not much slower than Luo Jian's punch. Luo Jian's eyes flashed. Genshin's reaction speed was much faster than he had imagined. At this moment, he did not have enough time to withdraw his right hand. Facing Genshin's kick that was not any slower than his own, Luo Jian had no time to dodge. Without any other choice, he quickly gathered wind-attributed Saint Force in his left hand. Then, with a violent surge of Saint Force, he sent a punch towards Genshin's kick with an unstoppable momentum. Luo Jian's punch that was filled with powerful Saint Force collided with Genshin's kick. The powerful force of the punch directly sent Genshin, whose Saint Force was much weaker, flying. Genshin's body quickly slid backwards. His feet rubbed against the ground, leaving behind two extremely clear marks. After retreating nearly 10 meters, Genshin finally neutralized the powerful force. From his expression, Genshin did not seem to have suffered much damage. Luo Jian casually rubbed his left hand. He looked at Genshin with a rare serious expression. After the short exchange, he already understood that he could not judge Genshin as an ordinary person. Although Genshin had not reached the Saint Realm, his battle prowess had definitely reached the Saint Realm. Luo Jian's eyes flickered with uncertainty. After hesitating for a while, he finally made up his mind. Based on the current situation, if he wanted to defeat Genshin as quickly as possible, he could only use his Saint weapon. Although this would inevitably make others laugh at him, he understood that if he did not use his Saint weapon, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Genshin in a short period of time. If he had to spend a lot of time dealing with a new student who had not even reached the Saint Realm, it would have an even greater impact on his reputation. Luo Jian could not help but feel vexed when he thought about how he needed to use his Saint weapon to deal with someone who had not even reached the Saint Realm. This made his hatred for Genshin deepen even more. Regardless of the outcome of today's battle, he would lose a great deal of face. On the other hand, Genshin's reputation would probably soar because of today's battle, spreading through the entire Kargath Academy once again. Luo Jian's eyes flickered with a chilling light. No one dared to look at his sharp gaze. Powerful Azure Saint Force crazily surged out from his hand, gradually condensing into a huge azure sword. The huge sword was 5 feet long and 3 inches wide. The entire sword was wrapped in a hazy azure light. The sharp edge of the sword reflected a dazzling light under the sunlight, causing people to tremble in fear. Sensing the powerful saint force radiating from the huge azure sword in Luo Jian's hand, Jianshan's face gradually became serious. With a saint weapon in hand, Luo Jian's strength had increased by several times. If Luo Jian did not use his saint weapon, Jianshan would still be able to barely deal with him. However, once he used his saint weapon, Jianshan would have to carefully and cautiously face the battle. With his rich battle experience from his previous life, he might be able to remain undefeated under Luo Jian's attacks, but it would be extremely difficult for him to win. With a saint weapon in hand, Luo Jian's aura suddenly soared. He stared sharply at the solemn Jianshan and said in a deep voice, "Changyang Shoten, I'll definitely cripple you today." Saying that, Luo Jian raised his huge azure sword high up. The entire sword shone with an azure light, and powerful saint force undulations caused the students who were hiding in the library to tremble. "Ah!" Luo Jian roared. The huge azure sword that was raised high above his head left behind a beautiful azure trail in the air. It suddenly slashed down at an extremely fast speed. A powerful azure sword chi left the sword and shot towards Jianshan with lightning speed. Feeling the power of this sword chi, Jianshan's face immediately became incomparably serious. It was definitely not something he could block with his current strength. The speed of the azure sword chi was extremely fast, so fast that it was inconceivable. Jianshan did not even have time to think. All of the strength in his body was concentrated on his legs. Just as he was about to use all of his strength to dodge, suddenly, a white shadow shot out from outside the field at an even faster speed than the azure sword chi, blocking in front of Jianshan. When the azure sword chi hit the white shadow, it actually disappeared without a trace. It did not even cause a single spark. The white shadow that had just arrived was a middle-aged man around 40 years old. The middle-aged man was wearing a white robe. His scholarly face was currently filled with seriousness. His ordinary eyes were filled with anger. When Luo Jian saw the middle-aged man wearing a white robe, his face suddenly changed and became slightly pale. The huge azure sword in his hand disappeared in an instant. He immediately bowed and respectfully greeted, "Vice Principal." These 3 short words revealed the faint fear in Luo Jian's voice. Chapter 31. Baiyan's sharp gaze paused on Luo Jian for a while before he coldly snorted. His gaze then turned to Tai Ta and Cheng Mingxiang, who were fighting fiercely. He shouted in a deep voice, "Why aren't you stopping?" Baiyan's voice was like a thunderclap that exploded in their ears, causing them to temporarily lose their sense of hearing. Tai Ta and Cheng Mingxiang stopped at the same time. When they saw Vice Principal Baiyan suddenly appear in the field, Tai Ta immediately beamed with joy and excitement, while Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly and became a little unsightly. Tai Ta came to Jianshan's side and carefully sized up Jianshan from head to toe. He asked in a low, muffled voice, "Changyang Shoten, are you hurt?" Jianshan gently shook his head and gave Tai Ta a look, telling him not to speak. Tai Ta chuckled. Although he looked silly, he could understand Jianshan's meaning at this time. He simply stopped talking nonsense and stood obediently by Jianshan's side without saying a word. However, he kept winking at Cheng Mingxiang, who had an unsightly expression on his face. His expression was full of provocation. It was obvious that the battle just now had not satisfied Tai Ta completely. Vice Principal Baiyan's sharp gaze stared at Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang. He said in a deep voice, "Luo Jian, you have violated the Academy's rules. You are guilty." Luo Jian indignantly raised his head and said, "Vice Principal, it is a very normal thing for students to exchange pointers. I was only exchanging pointers with student Changyang Shoten. How is that a crime? As for violating the Academy's rules, please tell me clearly where I have violated the Academy's rules." you still dare to quibble." The vice principal's face darkened and he said in a deep voice, "Luo Jian, what is the 66th rule of our Kargath Academy?" Hearing this, Luo Jian bowed his head and thought for a moment. After a while, he said, "The 66th rule is that fighting and destroying everything in the library are prohibited." Vice Principal Bai En sneered and said, "If I hadn't blocked that sword chi just now, I'm afraid that the gate of the Academy's library would have been destroyed by you. Luo Jian, don't you know that you are guilty?" Hearing this, Luo Jian's face suddenly changed. Vice Principal Bai En was right. If Jianshan had successfully dodged the sword chi just now, the gate of the library would have been destroyed, and even the students who were watching the fun would have been injured. As for the situation where Jianshan was unable to dodge the sword chi, Luo Jian did not dare to say it out loud. If he did, he would probably be charged with an even greater crime. This was because there was a clear rule in the academy that students could spar with each other, but if they intentionally injured others, they would be punished. Moreover, he had actually used a saint weapon to deal with a freshman who was not even a saint. Moreover, he had used a saint weapon and used almost all his strength to send out a powerful sword chi. This was no longer a simple matter of intentionally injuring others. Although he had already known the consequences of doing so, he had enough reasons to get away with it. However, at this moment, he was unexpectedly caught by the vice principal. The development of the matter was completely beyond his expectations. Now Luo Jian could only pray that the vice principal would not put a bigger crime on him. Luo Jian is guilty. Luo Jian didn't dare to be arrogant in front of the vice principal. Vice Principal Bai En snorted coldly and continued, "Luo Jian, now that you have violated the rules of the academy, I'll punish you to face the wall in the meditation hall for a month. Do you have any objections?" The meditation hall was the place where Kargath Academy punished students who had made mistakes. Although it was called a hall, it was actually just a small stone house built entirely out of stone. Unlike the dormitory, this stone house was extremely small and could only accommodate one person. Once the door was closed, the interior would be plunged into complete darkness. No matter how strong the light from the outside was, it would not be able to penetrate the completely sealed stone house. Once the heavy stone door was closed, the interior would be plunged into a deathly stillness. Even if the sky was filled with thunderstorms, one would not be able to feel it at all. Luo Jian is wholeheartedly convinced. "I have no objections." Luo Jian lowered his head and said respectfully. No one noticed that at this moment, Luo Jian's eyes were full of resentment. He was getting more and more resentful towards Jianshan in his heart. Vice Principal Bai En nodded slightly, his expression becoming a bit better. "After we leave, you can go to the meditation hall to face the wall and reflect." Subsequently, Vice Principal Bai En's gaze fell on Qing Mingxiang, who had an uneasy expression on his face. He said solemnly, "Qing Mingxiang, with your strength, you actually went to bully a new student. You've brought shame to our Kargath Academy." Cheng Mingxiang's face was expressionless as he said in a low voice, "Vice Principal's lecture is correct. Mingxiang knows his wrongs. There definitely won't be a next time. Cheng Mingxiang, I hope you remember that this is Kargath Academy and not your Huayan sect. As long as you are in Kargath Academy, you will have to abide by the rules of Kargath Academy. Otherwise, even if you are the Huayan sect's junior sect master, you will still be severely punished. I hope you won't have a next time. You can leave now." The vice principal was clearly somewhat afraid of Cheng Mingxiang and didn't dare to go too far. Cheng Mingxiang didn't say a word and silently left with the few students that had followed him. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, Luo Yun, Chen Feng, and Carl also didn't continue to stay and left with their tails between their legs. After they left, Vice Principal Bai En's gaze fell on Jianshan and he said with a smile, "You must be Changyang Shoten." Jianshan nodded and said in a neither haughty nor humble tone, "That is me." Vice Principal Bai En carefully sized up Changyang Shoten. The solemn expression on his face had long since disappeared. He smiled and said, "With strength that hasn't even reached the saint realm, you were actually able to force Luo Jindu to use his saint weapon. Changyang Shoten, you are very good." "Vice Principal, you praise me too much. I was just lucky for a moment." Jianchen indifferently replied, not revealing the slightest trace of arrogance on his face. Looking at Jianchen's calm expression, Vice Principal Bai En nodded in admiration and said, "Changyang Shoten, cultivate well and strive to become a saint as soon as possible." "Thank you for your concern, Vice Principal. I will definitely work hard to cultivate." Jianchen smiled. Bai En then turned his gaze to Tai Ta and said, "Tai Ta, although you have become the principal's disciple and your status is different from before, you must remember that only by increasing your strength will you truly be respected by others. Only then will you be able to stand firm on the Tianyuan continent. Do you understand?" Tai Ta nodded obediently and said in a low muffled voice, "Tai Ta understands." "Good." The vice president nodded and continued, "Although your innate talent is top-notch and your future achievements are limitless, but you must not be arrogant. You must face everything with an ordinary and calm heart. Remember, you must not learn from those hedonistic sons of aristocratic families. Now that you have become the vice president's disciple, you must work harder in your cultivation in the future. You must spend more time on your cultivation. You must not disappoint the vice president's painstaking efforts." Hearing that, Tai Ta patted his chest and promised Bai En, "Vice Principal, don't worry. Tai Ta will definitely work hard on his cultivation. I definitely won't embarrass Master." The vice principal nodded with a smile before leaving. After the vice principal left, Jianchen and Tai Ta chatted for a while longer before bidding each other farewell. He returned to the library to read his books. When Jianchen returned to the library, all the students who were originally reading in the library had already disappeared without a trace. Not long after, two sensational pieces of news spread through the entire Kargath Academy at an inconceivable speed. Tai Ta, who obtained second place in the freshman competition, actually became the principal's disciple. He even had a fierce battle with Cheng Mingxiang, who was known as a cultivation genius in the academy. In the freshman competition, the king of freshmen, Changyang Shoten, fought Luo Jian, who had the strength of an intermediate saint. He forced Luo Jian to use his holy weapon to fight with him. In the end, Vice Principal Bai En was alarmed and was punished to face the wall for a month. These two pieces of news spread to every corner of the Kargath Academy in just a few hours, causing all the teachers and students to be shocked. At the same time, Tai Ta also became a famous person in the Kargath Academy. Originally, he was only a commoner, but now, his status had undergone an earth-shattering change. Those aristocratic disciples who looked down on his background before had no choice but to change their expression when facing Tai Ta. At the same time, Tai Ta had become the target of all the disciples in the academy. Although Jianchen's reputation had also spread throughout the entire academy, it had been completely overshadowed by Tai Ta's extremely dazzling radiance. Regarding this, Jianchen did not mind at all. Even so, there were still many female students who cast their bright and infatuated gazes on Jianchen. Jianchen's appearance was extremely handsome, definitely not inferior to any male student in the Kargath Academy. Coupled with his unique aura and powerful strength, he was definitely a lady killer. Therefore, in the Kargath Academy, Jianchen had already become the Prince Charming in the hearts of many young girls. Ever since the battle in the library, Jianchen's days had not been peaceful. Every time he appeared in the academy, there would always be many male students who would use various reasons as an excuse to challenge him. Even when Jianchen went to the library to read, there would be many people who would harass him, causing him to not even be able to read in peace. For this reason, Jianchen had made a few moves and taught a few self-righteous and arrogant hedonistic disciples a lesson. However, perhaps because Jianchen was too lenient, the deterrence effect was negligible and could almost be ignored. In the end, Jianchen had no choice but to bring the book to the dormitory to read after getting the agreement from the vice principal. Apart from reading, Jianchen spent all his free time on cultivation. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, 3 months had already passed. Early in the morning, when the sun slowly rose into the sky, Jianchen, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, finally opened his eyes slowly. The moment he opened his eyes, 2 rays of light flashed through his eyes. Jianchen slightly lowered his head and slowly opened his palm, only to see that his palm was completely empty. The Class 3 monster core that was originally in his hand had already completely disappeared. Feeling the powerful Saint force that was surging like the Yangtze River in his body, Jianshan's face finally revealed a trace of a smile. Saint force at the peak of the 10th layer. Chapter 32. Jianshan looked at the sky outside the window. The sun was already high up in the sky and it was getting late. Today was a special day for Kargath Academy, because today, Kargath Academy would be holding a large-scale activity. All the teachers and students of the academy had to participate, and the activity was called Wilderness Survival Battle. All the students had to go to a small forest 20 miles away from Kargath Academy and stay there for 3 days. Students who had yet to reach the Saint Realm had to obtain at least 2 rank 1 monster cores in these 3 days to pass the test, and students who had reached the Saint Realm had to obtain at least 2 rank 2 monster cores in order to pass the test. There was no limit to the number of monster cores that could be handed in, but the student who handed in the most monster cores would receive a very rich reward, a rank 4 Earth monster core and a spatial ring. Even in the eyes of the rich children of large clans, such a rich reward was enough to move them. At the same time, all the students who passed would be able to read various books on battle skills and cultivation methods on the 4th floor of the library. This reward was even more attractive to the students who came from ordinary families. Battle skills were battle skills that could unleash powerful attacks. Through the unique use of Saint Force, one could unleash 120% of one's strength, or even unleash powerful attacks that completely exceeded one's own strength. Cultivation methods could only be used by saints. Some commoner families did not even have the lowest level of cultivation methods. The children of commoner families basically relied on the most shallow breathing method to cultivate Saint Force. This breathing method was spread to every corner of the continent and its contents were extremely simple. Almost every commoner knew its contents. The only flaw was that this breathing method could only allow one to cultivate Saint Force to the 10th layer. It was completely useless to those who had already reached the Saint Realm. Therefore, in the eyes of those students who were born in commoner families, a combat skill and cultivation method was already a rare treasure. On the Tianyuan continent, all battle skills and cultivation methods were divided into 4 grades, which were the Saint tier, Heaven tier, Earth tier, and Human tier. Each grade was further divided into elementary, intermediate, and advanced grades. After leaving the dormitory, Jianshan headed straight for the field. The activity this time had been announced 3 days ago. After 3 days, almost all the students had finished their preparations and adjusted their strength to their peak. When Jianshan arrived at the field, it was already filled with people. However, it was very clear that they were divided into 2 camps. One camp was made up of all the rich children, while the other camp was made up of commoners without any background. All the students who had not reached the Saint Realm held a weapon that shone with a cold light in their hands. Because they were going to fight against the magical beasts, the academy allowed them to choose a defensive weapon of their own. Jianshan went straight to the weapon rack, but when he saw the few remaining weapons, he could not help but frown slightly. Almost all the good weapons had been chosen by the students in front of him. The remaining weapons were either inferior or heavy weapons that required brute force to wield. They were not suitable for him at all. His gaze slowly swept across the weapon rack. When Jianshan found a broken iron rod that was as thick as a finger, his eyes suddenly lit up. He immediately reached out and pulled it out with difficulty. The iron rod was about 1 meter long and as thick as a finger. It was covered in brownish-yellow rust and had a very sharp tip on one end. Jianshan weighed the rusty iron rod in his hand and then tested its hardness. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. Although it was inconvenient to hold the iron rod, its weight and length were just right for Jianshan to use. Among the remaining weapons, this iron rod was undoubtedly the only one that could allow Jianshan to exert as much of his strength as possible. At this moment, Tai Ta walked out of the crowd. He was carrying a huge axe that was slightly larger than his body on his back. He looked even more majestic now. Tai Ta walked up to Jianshan. When his gaze fell on the rusty iron rod in Jianshan's hand, he could not help but show a trace of doubt in his eyes. He asked in confusion, "Hey, Chengyang Shoten, What are you doing with this iron rod? Genshin chuckled. What else can it be? Obviously it's a weapon. No way, Changyang Shoten, you're actually using this broken iron rod as a weapon? Is there something wrong with your head? Tai Ta was shocked. Genshin gently chuckled and did not explain any further. Although Tai Ta was very confused by Genshin's use of a broken iron rod as a weapon, he did not dwell on the matter. He continued, Changyang Shoten, why don't we fight together? If we work together, there won't be a single Class 1 magical beast that can threaten us. We can even kill Class 2 magical beasts that are stronger than us. Moreover, I've been fighting with wild beasts in the forest since I was young, so I've gradually gained some experience in surviving in the wild. You'll definitely suffer a lot less if you're with me. With that, Genshin pondered slightly before nodding in agreement to Tai Ta's suggestion. The academy did not forbid students from gathering in groups of 3 or 5 to hunt magical beasts, so most students were allowed to travel in groups of 3 or 5. At this moment, a handsome and arrogant rich man arrived before Tai Ta. He smiled and said, Hello Tai Ta, I'm Sumis at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. Why don't we work together? I believe that if we work together, it'll be easier for us to kill magical beasts. Tai Ta glanced at Sumis before shaking his head. No need. Changyang Shoten and I are enough. We don't need anyone else. Sumis was not discouraged at all by Tai Ta's rejection. He turned to Genshin and immediately became rather arrogant. He said, You must be Changyang Shoten, the 4th young master of Changyang Prefecture in Lore City. You really are a talent. Changyang Shoten, I'm from the Sumis clan in the Forbidden City. My father is the patriarch of the Sumis clan. May I ask if Junior Changyang Shoten would be happy to have me join your group? Although Sumis's words could be considered polite, his tone faintly carried a hint of coercion. The Forbidden City was a royal city, but for the Kingdom of Jesson, the Forbidden City was an imperial city because the royal palace was located in the Forbidden City. Hearing Sumi's threatening tone, Genshin frowned. He glanced at Sumi's handsome face and said indifferently, I'm sorry, but we don't need anyone to join us. After all, we're facing a rank 1 magical beast. We don't have the time to take care of others. Hearing this, Sumi's face turned dark. Genshin's words clearly showed that he looked down on his strength. Sumi's face was gloomy. He glared fiercely at Genshin's calm face, then snorted coldly and left. After Sumi's left, many people with extraordinary identities came one after another. These people either greeted Tai Ta or wanted to join Tai Ta's team. However, they were all rejected by Tai Ta. Tai Ta didn't have a good impression of these people and didn't want to say a word to them. After everyone left, a burly young man, not much smaller than Tai Ta, walked over from the distance with 3 students in their 20s. They arrived in front of Genshin and patted Genshin's shoulder. He laughed and said, 4th brother, you're now famous in the academy. In our Kargath Academy, there's probably no one who doesn't know your name. Not bad, not bad. You didn't lose face for our Changyang Prefecture and let Big Brother share a lot of glory with you. The burly young man was Genshin's big brother, Changyang Hu. At this moment, Changyang Hu's face was filled with a happy smile. That excitement came from the bottom of his heart. A smile appeared on Genshin's face. Big brother, don't make fun of me. Right, you came at the right time. Why don't we travel together this time? Changyang Hu shook his head. He seemed to have thought of something and smiled happily. 4th brother, if you said this to me 7 days ago, I might have been happy to go with you. But now I can't. 7 days ago, I finally condensed a saint weapon and became a saint. This time, we're going to enter the 3rd level of the forest to hunt Class 2 magical beasts, so I can't go with you. As he spoke, powerful saint force surged out of Changyang Hu's body. With a flash of yellow light, a huge double-edged axe appeared in Changyang Hu's hand. The axe was extremely large, even larger than a wash basin. The entire axe shined with a yellow light. 4th brother, not bad, right? After condensing a saint weapon, I was pleasantly surprised to find that my saint force was actually of the earth attribute. Changyang Hu was very proud of himself. A battle between a saint weapon with an elemental attribute and a saint weapon without an elemental attribute would usually result in an extremely large advantage. If two people of similar strength were to fight, the person with the elemental attribute would almost always be the final victor if nothing unexpected happened. Everyone could only discover the attribute of Saint Force after condensing a Saint Weapon. As a result, it was very difficult to discover the attribute of Saint Force before becoming a saint. However, the chances of having Saint Force with an attribute were extremely low. On average, only 1 in 1,000 people would have a Saint Weapon with an attribute. Kargath Academy was basically filled with the students with the most potential in the entire kingdom of Jessen, so it was very normal for there to be many students with an attribute of Saint Force. Looking at the double-edged axe in Changyanghu's hand, Genshin couldn't help but smile happily. Big brother, congratulations on condensing a Saint Weapon and becoming a Saint Weapon with an attribute. Changyanghu was extremely happy. He extended his hand and pointed at the young men who had come with him. Oh right, fourth brother, let me introduce you. They're the more outstanding ones among my direct descendants. They're Changyang Aojian, Changyang Feng, and Changyang Shaon. We greet the fourth young master. The 3 young men all bowed towards Genshin. They were extremely respectful. The hierarchy in Changyang Prefecture was extremely strict, so even though they were direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture, their status was slightly lower than Genshin's. Even though many of them were older than Genshin, they still treated Genshin with respect. Moreover, the 3 of them didn't feel the slightest bit of injustice towards Genshin, who was slightly younger than them. Instead, they were filled with pride. This was because Genshin had used only 80% of his Saint Force to defeat Saint Kadiun, who didn't use a Saint Weapon. It was the same as when he fought Luo Jian empty-handed a few months ago. In the end, he even forced Luo Jian to use his Saint Weapon. Genshin's achievements caused all the teachers and students in Kargath Academy to sigh in admiration. Chapter 33. After introducing Tai Ta to Changyanghu, Genshin began to chat with Changyanghu. Only when Vice Principal Baien arrived did they part. Vice Principal Baien then gave a speech and cleaned up all the students, temporarily taking away their space belts and space rings to prevent some people from using the magic cores in their space rings to make up the numbers. Afterwards, he gave all the students a space belt of the lowest grade. These space belts were not worth much on the Tianyuan continent. They were very common items, which was why the Academy could take out over 1,000 of them at once. The space in each space belt was very small, only 1 meter square. However, it was enough to store monster cores. Inside each space belt, there were some healing medicines. When everything was ready, the 1,000-plus students began to leave Kargath Academy in a grandiose manner. They walked towards a forest 20 miles away, accompanied by dozens of Academy teachers. Their mission was to spread out in the forest and be ready to rescue any students in danger at any time. The one leading the team was the vice principal, Bai En. After leaving the academy, everyone gradually increased their speed. After all, even the weakest among them had reached 80% of Saint Force. Even though they did not travel at full speed, their speed was still very fast. After 2 hours of travel, everyone finally arrived at the outskirts of the forest. When they arrived, everyone could clearly see that the entire forest was enveloped by a layer of faint white light. Jian Chen's eyes were filled with curiosity as he looked at the forest shrouded in a layer of white light. He had read a large amount of books in the library, so he was very clear about the origins of this forest. 300 years ago, this place was a wasteland filled with weeds. There was no such forest at all. Later on, the principal of Kargath Academy mobilized the strength of thousands of people and spent an entire year to develop this place. In the end, this forest was not very large. Even so, this forest still covered an area of 50 kilometers. After more than 100 years of development, this forest gradually turned into a primeval forest. When the forest was fully formed, the dean of Kargath Academy, Bun Ein, personally took action. He spent 3 days and 3 nights to lay down a huge enchantment that enveloped the entire forest. Moreover, he divided the forest into 3 regions. Each region was covered by a layer of powerful enchantment. Finally, he released some magic beasts with low attack power but strong reproductive ability to enter. This was to be used by the students of the academy to gain experience. In order to nurture more talents for the Jessen Kingdom, Headmaster Bernine had spent a great deal of effort. However, at that time, Headmaster Bernine was someone else and not the current headmaster of Kargath Institute. At this moment, the calm voice of the vice principal rang out from the front. Students, from now on, you must stay in the forest for 3 days and hand over at least 2 monster cores to pass. If you leave the forest midway or fail to hand over 2 monster cores, you will fail and will not receive any rewards. The vice principal's voice rang out clearly in the ears of every student present. Now, everyone will split up. Students who have yet to reach Saint Realm can work together to hunt magical beasts in the 2nd region. Students who have reached Saint Realm, please head to the 3rd region. Afterward, everyone gradually split up. Changyang Shoten and Tai Ta walked together very naturally. Since the barrier only targeted magical beasts, they were not stopped at all when they entered the barrier. Jianshan and Tai Ta arrived in the 1st region after entering the barrier. The magical beasts in this region were not very powerful. They had not reached Class 1 yet. These magical beasts were usually called wild beasts on the Tianyuan continent because they could only be called magical beasts after reaching Class 1. With over 1,000 students walking together, even a few particularly ferocious beasts did not dare to cause trouble. As a result, it was extremely peaceful along the way. Very soon, they passed through another barrier and arrived in the 2nd region. All the magical beasts in this region were Class 1 magical beasts. To people who had not even reached Saint Realm, even Class 1 magical beasts with low attack power were enough to pose a threat to them. After entering the 2nd region, Jianshan and Tai Ta took the initiative to separate from the group. They made their way into the depths of the dense forest. The surroundings were filled with weeds that were as tall as a person, which greatly affected their vision. They were unable to make out the path at all. There were only traces left behind by many large magical beasts on the ground. Changyang Shoten, we can come across magical beasts at any time. We need to be careful. We can't be careless, Tai Ta said rather sternly. He had fought with wild beasts in the forest since he was young, so he was extremely experienced. He understood very well just how dangerous the forest was. As long as he was careless, he could lose his life here. Jianshan revealed a sliver of confidence. He said indifferently, "Don't worry. Even if you come across danger, I might not be in danger." With the memories from his past life, Jianshan could not be treated like a normal person. He had lived in primitive forests many times in his past life, so it could be said that Jianshan's experience in surviving in the forest was much greater than Tai Ta's. Moreover, he had read a large number of books in the library. Many of them were experiences of surviving in the forest of magical beasts. Tai Ta tightened his grip on the huge axe in his hand. He looked around cautiously and said, "I've killed many wild beasts in the past, but I've never killed a Class 1 magical beast. Those are powerful magical beasts that have reached the level of saint. Even saints with saint weapons might not be able to kill them. I wonder if we can kill a Class 1 magical beast if we come across one. After all, those magical beasts will run away. We definitely won't be able to catch up here." Jianshan gently smiled. "Tai Ta, do you have so little confidence in your own strength?" Tai Ta blushed slightly. He scratched his head and said honestly, "No, I'm very confident in my own strength. My teacher said that I can defeat regular saints with my current strength, but I've never killed a Class 1 magical beast before. I haven't even seen one." As soon as Tai Ta said that, Jianshan's face stiffened slightly. He immediately extended his hand to stop Tai Ta from continuing. Light flickered through his eyes as he looked around in interest. Tai Ta immediately knew that danger was approaching when he noticed Jianshan's sudden seriousness. He immediately became cautious as if he was facing a great enemy. He slowly scanned the dense weeds around him. Jianshan looked around sharply. However, the weeds had grown extremely strong after years of production, completely blocking his vision. As a result, Jianshan was unable to see anything. Jianchen gently gripped the metal rod in his right hand as he slowly closed his eyes. His ears trembled slightly as he listened carefully to the movements around him. After a few seconds, Jianchen suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, a sharp light flashed through his eyes. Afterwards, Jianchen took a step forward. The rusty metal rod in his right hand suddenly stabbed out with lightning-like speed as it shone with a brownish-yellow light. At the same time, a green branch suddenly shot out from the weeds, shooting towards Jianchen as quickly as it could. Jianchen's metal rod collided with the green branch in the air. The branch was immediately obstructed, pausing slightly in the air. The tip of the metal rod had already pierced the branch's body. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that the branch was actually a green, venomous snake. It was as thick as an adult's arm. Just the part of its body that was exposed was 2 meters long. At this moment, a strong gust of wind whistled past Jianchen's ears. Tai Ta swung his huge axe towards the green venomous snake with an ear-piercing sound. The axe viciously struck the venomous snake's body. The powerful force directly sent it flying far away. It flew for close to 10 meters before falling to the ground with a soft thud. However, there were just too many weeds here. Jianchen and Tai Ta could not even see the snake clearly from 5 meters away, let alone 10 meters. Chase after it. We can't let it hide. Jianchen understood his situation very well. As soon as he spoke, he quickly chased after the venomous snake. If the venomous snake carefully hid in an environment like this, it would cause a lot of trouble for the two of them. After all, they would brush against countless weeds with every step they took. Moreover, it was very difficult to see what was beneath their feet. It would be very troublesome to guard against a venomous snake that was prepared. Tai Ta did not hesitate at all and quickly chased after Jianchen. When Tai Ta caught up to Jianchen, he saw that Jianchen had already stopped. 3 meters away, the venomous snake raised its head high and stared at the two of them with a pair of cold eyes. Its mouth was constantly spitting out snake apricots. This venomous snake was already 1.5 meters tall when it raised its body. There were 2 wounds on its body that was as thick as an adult's arm. One of them was a deep bloody hole left by Jianchen, and the other was a long wound left by Tai Ta's axe. The wound was cut horizontally across its waist, and the flesh around the wound was cut open. Bright red blood continuously flowed out from the wound. Jianchen stared at the venomous snake cautiously. Even though the snake before him had weaker attacks, it was still a Class 1 magical beast after all. It was no weaker than a saint who had condensed a saint weapon. Tai Ta stared at the snake sternly as well. The veins on his hands bulged as he gripped his axe tightly, ready to strike as hard as he could at any time. After a short moment of stalemate, Jianchen finally moved. The short distance of 3 meters was almost negligible in his eyes. With a slight sway of his body, Jianchen had already crossed the distance of 2 meters. In an instant he arrived in front of the viper. With an ear-piercing sound, the iron rod in his hand pierced through the air at a speed that was difficult to follow with the naked eye, aiming straight for the viper's heart. The venomous snake let out a hoarse roar. Its body nimbly shifted slightly, dodging the fatal blow. Even so, the rusty iron rod still pierced deeply into its body, penetrating through. The tip of the rod came out from the other side of its body. Hiss! The intense pain made the green venomous snake release a hoarse roar, its mouth wide open. Yeah! Tai Ta was not slow either. He swung his axe with all his might and chopped at the snake's head with all his might. Chapter 34. Looking at the head that flew high up in the air and the body that was still crazily spraying blood, Tai Ta was stunned. He couldn't believe that a first-level magical beast could be killed so easily, because this green poisonous snake didn't require much effort at all. Jianchen slowly pulled out the iron rod that was still stuck in the snake's body, and casually wiped the blood that was left on the tip of the iron rod on the surrounding weeds. In fact, the biggest contribution in killing this first-level magical beast was Jianchen. If it wasn't for his lightning-fast sword that pierced the snake's body and gave Mao a huge wound, Tai Ta's axe wouldn't have been able to chop off the snake's head so easily. Tai Ta took back his axe, and looked at the snake's body that had lost its head and was constantly twisting. He murmured, "Chiang Shoten, is this really a first-level magical beast? Why is it so weak?" Hearing this, Jianchen chuckled. "Actually, it's not that this magical beast is too weak, but the two of us together are too strong. And this first-level magical beast is enough to bring a lot of trouble to some people who have just advanced to the saint level." Iron Tower chuckled as he wiped the blood off his axe. He then placed the axe on his shoulder and said with a silly smile, "If that's the case, then we can easily kill Class 1 magic beasts here." Hearing this, Jianchen seemed to have thought of something. He couldn't help but reveal a happy smile. "That's right. With our strength, even if we were to encounter a Class 1 magical beast alone, we would still be able to kill it, not to mention if we were to work together. It can be said that there are basically no magical beasts in the second area that can pose a threat to us. After all, the magical beasts here are all raised by the Academy. Their purpose is to train the students' actual combat ability. It's impossible for there to be overly powerful magical beasts, unless..." Speaking to this point, Jianchen paused as a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Tai Ta became excited when he heard Jianchen's words. He said, "Unless what? Unless we meet a group of magical beasts, but I don't know if there will be any here." With that, Jianchen's face gradually became serious. With their strength, they wouldn't have any trouble dealing with a single first-level magical beast, but if they met a group, it would be hard to say. Tai Ta frowned and said uncertainly, "It shouldn't be possible. I've fought with beasts in the forest for a long time, and I've never met a group of beasts." "That's not necessarily true. I've read many books about magical beasts in the library, and I've discovered that some magical beasts basically all live in groups. They have a very strong sense of unity, and they rarely move alone." As he spoke, Jianchen arrived before the headless snake. Only now did he discover that the snake was actually 6 or 7 meters long. Afterward, Jianchen stabbed his rod into the snake's weak point and removed a blood-soaked crystal. On the Tianyuan continent, there were many different types of magical beasts, and their monster cores were all located in different places. Some were in their heads, some were in their chests, and some were in their stomachs. The monster cores of snake-type magical beasts were located at the 7th inch of their bodies. This was something that Jianchen had already learned from books. Bang! Tower swung the axe on his shoulder at a tree beside him, directly chopping the tree that was as thick as a water bucket in half. He yelled out heroically, "If we really encounter a group of magical beasts, I, Lord Tower, will definitely make sure they don't return alive." Jianchen picked up the monster core from the snake's body and wiped off the blood on the grass before tossing it to Tai Ta. He said, "All right, stop howling. Although there are quite a few magical beasts that live in groups on the Tianyuan continent, who knows if we'll be able to come across them. After all, this isn't the magical beast forest." Tai Ta then took the monster core that Jianchen threw over and asked doubtfully, "Why are you giving it to me?" Jianchen smiled, "This snake was killed by you, so this monster core should be yours." Seeing that Tai Ta was about to refuse, Jianchen continued, "Don't refuse this monster core, just take it. After all, we still have at least 3 days. During this time, our harvest will be very rich, so we don't care about this monster core." "Hee, all right then. I'll take this monster core first. No matter which one of us kills the next magical beast, the monster core will be yours." Tai Ta was overjoyed as he held the monster core that still had some traces of blood on it. After all, this was the first monster core he had obtained from killing a magical beast. Afterwards, the two of them continued on their way. Since he knew that Jianchen was extremely sensitive to danger, Tai Ta straightforwardly gave the task of being on guard to Jianchen. He, on the other hand, constantly swung his axe, clearing the path ahead. Although swinging such a heavy axe was extremely exhausting, it was like eating a normal meal to Tai Ta, who was born with great strength. It did not exhaust him at all. After all, not only was his strength frighteningly great, it was almost limitless. It was almost impossible for him to run out of strength. Not long after the two of them started walking, Jianchen's ears twitched slightly, and his footsteps suddenly stopped. He immediately reached out and pulled Tai Ta, who was constantly chopping at the weeds in front of him, and made a silent gesture. Tai Ta understood and stopped chopping at the weeds. He held the axe tightly with both hands and came to Genshin's side, standing side by side with Genshin. His eyes shone brightly as he vigilantly looked around. The two of them breathed very lightly, and their expressions were full of vigilance. The difference was that Tai Ta's eyes were constantly looking around, while Genshin closed his eyes slightly, using his perception to feel everything around him. The weeds were overgrown, so it was very difficult to see anything with one's eyes. Even if there really was an unknown danger hidden here, it was probably not something that could be seen with one's eyes. As a result, Tai Ta did not discover anything even after looking around for quite some time. Genshin gently closed his eyes. His sensitive ears twitched from time to time, capturing all the sounds around him. At the same time, Genshin's mind was also on high alert, using his powerful spirit to sense everything around him. At this moment, Genshin could not help but reminisce about the battle between him and Dugu Chiobai in his previous life. In the end, he made a breakthrough right before his death, reaching the realm of wielding a sword with his spirit. At that time, his spirit had become extremely powerful and could easily spread out, enveloping everything around him. Nothing within the range of his spirit could escape his perception. However, Genshin felt regretful. Although his spirit was extremely powerful after his reincarnation, he was unable to spread it out. Otherwise, this forest would not have been a problem for Genshin at all. It would have been extremely easy for him to find the magical beasts hiding here. Genshin's spirit was highly focused as he tried his best to sense everything around him. Slowly, his mind entered a special state. Although his spirit did not spread out at this moment, his spirit seemed to have established a subtle connection with the various plants around him. It was as if they had merged into one. This feeling was very mysterious. However, when Genshin entered this state, his perception suddenly reached a new height. Finally, a faint breathing sound entered Genshin's perception. This breathing was simply too subtle. Even if you were standing next to it, you would probably not be able to sense it. Genshin's tightly closed eyes opened in an instant. Immediately, his body flashed and disappeared from where he was standing. He quickly rushed to the side. On the way, Genshin's body constantly twisted and adjusted, avoiding the weeds and branches that blocked his path. In a short moment, Genshin had already crossed a distance of 10 meters. Then he quickly stabbed the iron rod in his hand. Along the way, the iron rod silently pierced through a few leaves and a few weeds. With lightning speed, he stabbed towards a black shadow hidden in the weeds. "Ayo!" A scream mixed with pain suddenly sounded. Then, a black shadow jumped out from the grass. It opened its bloody mouth and pounced towards Genshin. This was a black panther, a full 2 meters long. At this moment, there was a finger-sized hole in the black panther's forehead. A torrent of blood continuously flowed out from the wound, slowly flowing down the black fur on its face. It looked even more ferocious. Genshin's gaze was as sharp as a sword. His indifferent face revealed a trace of a cold smile. Then, with a shake of his arm, he once again stabbed the iron rod in his hand at an inconceivable speed. The target was the Black Panther's throat. In the end, before the Black Panther could react, the tip of the iron rod had already pierced deeply into the Black Panther's throat. Coupled with the fact that the Black Panther's body was in a forward pouncing posture in midair, its cumbersome body was constantly falling down. In the end, the iron rod pierced through its throat and came out from its spine. This time, the Black Panther did not even have the time to cry out before it died. It collapsed on the ground with its eyes wide open. It had died with remaining grievances. Only at this moment did Tai Ta rush over from behind. When he saw the Black Panther lying on the ground with its throat pierced by the rusty iron rod, his eyes immediately widened. He was as shocked as he could be. "Changyang Shoten, did you kill it?" Tai Ta asked with a trembling voice. Even though he had seen Genshin's weapon pierce the Black Panther's throat with his own eyes, he still could not believe what he had just seen. This was because far too little time had passed. When Genshin had rushed over, Tai had followed as quickly as he could. However, By the time he arrived, a Class 1 magical beast had already died at Jianshan's hands. It had taken less than a breath, not even half a breath. Killing a Class 1 magical beast in less than half a breath was naturally extremely easy for some experts. However, Tai Ta understood Jianshan's strength very well. He definitely had not become a saint yet, and the weapon he used was only a rusty iron rod. Jianshan stepped on the Black Panther's head and slowly pulled out the iron rod. He smiled carelessly and said, "That's right, I killed it. It was just a coincidence. It shouldn't have died so quickly, but it insisted on drilling into my weapon. As a result, it died before it could even cry out." Tai Ta scratched the back of his head when he heard that. He stared at Jianshan's calm face in doubt and asked in disbelief, "Really? You're not lying to me?" Jianshan chuckled, "Of course it's true. Why would I lie to you?" Chapter 35. After retrieving the monster core, Jianshan and Tai Ta continued their journey of hunting magical beasts. Hunting a Class 1 magical beast with the strength of a saint was definitely an extremely difficult mission for regular students of the academy. Their lives could be in danger at any time. However, in the eyes of Jianshan and Tai Ta, it was nothing more than a game. The second zone had completely become a golden ground for the two of them to hunt for monster cores. A day passed very quickly. Night fell. Jianshan and Tai Ta sat in an empty space that had been cleared out. There was a torch between the two of them. The bright light constantly flickered in the dark night, causing their reflections to constantly distort. They seemed like demons baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. The surroundings were pitch black. Outside of the range of the flames, one couldn't even see one's own fingers. The night was not so calm. In the woods, who knew how far away, there were constant roars and howls of magical beasts, making one's hair stand on end. If a timid person were to spend the night in such an environment, he would probably be scared out of his wits. Tai Ta flipped over a large piece of unknown magical beast meat on the rack. With the light from the fire, he could clearly see that Tai Ta and Jianshan's clothes were all tattered and covered in blood. These bloodstains were all from the magical beasts, and their clothes were all cut by some thorns. "Changyang Shoten, you really are amazing. I never thought that your rusty metal rod would be so powerful. You basically killed all the magical beasts we killed today. Only the small snake we met at the beginning was killed by me," Tai Ta praised. Jianshan smiled faintly. "I just happened to grasp the opportunity. If you hadn't heavily injured the magical beasts, it would have been rather difficult for me to kill them." Tai Ta chuckled. He finally found some comfort in his heart. He continued, "Changyang Shoten, can you tell me why you're always able to sense the approach of magical beasts beforehand?" Tai Ta's face was filled with curiosity. He had been holding this question in his heart for an entire day, and now he finally found the right opportunity to ask. Jianshan did not hide anything. He pointed at his ears and head and said, "Use this and this." Iron Tower followed Jianshan's actions and pointed at his ears and head. He asked curiously, "Are you talking about stopping with your ears and thinking with your head?" "You're half right." Jianshan rubbed the tip of the iron rod against a large rock that he had purposely moved near his feet. He replied absent-mindedly, "Apart from listening with your ears, you also need to use your spirit to sense the surroundings. However, the latter method is still a little too difficult for you right now." "Oh." Tai Ta nodded as if he didn't fully understand. Then, a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Jianshan placed the iron rod, which was almost molded, beside him. He untied the spatial belt around his waist and said, "Iron Tower, let's look at today's harvest." With that, Jianshan continuously shook the spatial belt and poured out all the monster cores stored inside. As the monster cores rolled out of the spatial belt one after another, they gradually formed a small mountain in front of Jianshan. Iron Tower did the same. He took off his own space belt and poured out all the magic cores inside. In the end, he also piled them up into a small mountain of 1 foot high. "I have a total of 48 here." Jianshan wore a satisfied smile on his face. Today's harvest was undoubtedly huge. "I have a total of 49 here, one more than you." Tai Ta's voice was filled with excitement. It was definitely the first time he had seen so many monster cores in his life. In the past, he had never thought that he would actually possess so many monster cores one day, even though they were all at the first level. However, to Tai Ta, who was born in a commoner family, this was already a huge amount of wealth. To have such a bountiful harvest on the first day, it's not bad. I wonder if we can become the person with the most monster cores with our current number of monster cores. After all, the rewards are very generous. A 4th level monster core and a spatial ring. Jianshan was also moved by the bountiful rewards. Most importantly, it was the 4th level monster core. The energy of a 4th level monster core was much purer than a 1st level monster core. At this time, Jianshan's eyes suddenly narrowed. He shouted in a low voice, "Quickly put away the monster cores. Someone is coming." After saying that, Jianshan immediately put the monster cores on the ground into his spatial belt and hung it on his waist. Tai Ta was not slow either. As soon as he heard Jianshan's reminder, he began to pick up the monster cores on the ground in a flurry. When Jianshan finished, Tai Ta had also put all the monster cores into his spatial belt. After the two of them stored all the monster cores into their spatial belts, they waited for a few breaths of time before the grass in the distance began to sway slightly. With a rustling sound, a thin person walked out from the grass. When he saw Jianshan and Tai Ta standing in front of the bonfire, he was clearly stunned. Then he let out a cry filled with joy. Like a weak girl who had grabbed onto a life-saving straw, he ran over with messy steps. "I finally found someone. I finally found someone. I beg you to save me. Don't leave me behind. I'm scared. I'm really scared. Those magical beasts want to eat me." That person's tone was very flustered and full of fear, but his voice was very soft. Hearing this, Jianshan and Tai Ta finally understood that this person was actually a girl. With the help of the flickering firelight, they could vaguely see that the girl was wearing Kargath Academy's uniform. However, the uniform had been torn by the thistles and thorns in the forest. It was already a bit of clothing that didn't cover her body. Even her white underwear was exposed. Moreover, her clothes were also covered with mud. It seemed that she had fallen many times. The girl's face was full of mud and couldn't be seen clearly. However, her long cheeks had 2 clear lines of tears. Her pair of watery eyes were full of pleading as she looked at Jianshan. She looked very pitiful and helpless. "Sit down first." Jianshan tried his best to make his tone more amiable. With regards to the girl's situation, he already had a good guess. In this kind of environment, even some men who hadn't experienced the hardships would feel their hair stand on end, let alone a girl. Seeing that the other party was actually a delicate girl, Tai Ta also relaxed his vigilance. He gently put down the axe in his hand and looked at the girl with curiosity. Jianshan looked at the girl and asked, "Can you tell me your name?" "I'm called Liang Xiaola." The girl answered a little timidly. She looked at Jianshan and Tai Ta evasively. Her eyes were full of fear, as well as some faint worry and fear. "You're a girl, why aren't you with others? You're so timid, yet you still want to walk alone in the forest. Just a few random roars scared you to this extent?" Tai Ta asked in a low, muffled voice. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta timidly and said in a low voice, "I was originally with a few friends. Unfortunately, we met a magical beast later on. That magical beast was very strong. Even with all of us together, we couldn't beat it. Very quickly, a few of us were injured. In the end, when we were running away, I accidentally got separated from everyone." Hearing this, Tai Ta pouted in disdain and muttered to himself, "A few people can't even deal with a first-rank magical beast. How useless. Changyang Shoten and I killed almost 100 magical beasts today." Thinking of this, a sense of pride spontaneously rose in Tai Ta's heart. Gulyalu. At this moment, a strange sound suddenly sounded. Immediately, Jianshan and Tai Ta's eyes focused on the source of the sound. It was actually Liang Xiaola's stomach. At this moment, her stomach was continuously making gulyalu sounds. Hungry. Jianshan's face revealed a trace of a smile. Liang Xiaola nodded a little shyly and said in a soft voice, I haven't eaten for 2 meals. Saying this, Liang Xiaola's eyes kept glancing at the golden magical beast meat on the fire. Her nose greedily sniffed the faint fragrance, but the more she was like this, the more her stomach growled. In the end, Jianchen and Tai Ta heard a rumbling sound in their ears. Jianchen smiled and picked up the stick with the magical beast meat. He was not afraid of the heat and directly tore off a large piece with his hands and placed it in front of Liang Xiaola. He said, "Take it and eat. Be careful, it's hot." Liang Xiaola rubbed her hands together and wiped the dirt off her hands with the corner of her tattered clothes. She carefully took the magical beast meat and ate it in big mouthfuls without caring about the hot meat. Liang Xiaola was probably starving. He quickly ate up such a large piece of magical beast meat, and still looked at the remaining large piece of magical beast meat with an unsatisfied expression. Jianchen smiled and tore off another large piece of magical beast meat and placed it in front of Liang Xiaola. He said, "Take it and eat." Looking at the piece of magical beast meat in front of her, Liang Xiaola hesitated for a moment. In the end, she did not reach out to take it. Instead, she looked at Jianchen and Tai Ta and said in a soft voice, "I'm done eating. What are you going to eat?" Hearing this, Tai Ta laughed and said, "Don't worry, we still have a big one. Look under that tree." Tai Ta pointed in a direction. Liang Xiaola looked in the direction of Tai Ta's finger and found that there was an unknown magical beast under a big tree not far away. One of its legs had disappeared and there were still traces of blood on the ground. Looking at the corpse of the magical beast, Liang Xiaola swallowed hard and said, "You guys are really amazing. 2 people can kill a level 1 magical beast. TSK, this is nothing." Tai Ta did not care. Time passed silently. Very soon, Jianchen and Tai Ta had finished eating as well. They were about to rest. "Oi, where am I going to sleep?" Liang Xiaola asked awkwardly. Jianchen pointed at the tree nearby and said, "Go rest in the tree. That way, even if magical beasts attack at night, they won't hurt you." "Ah, there are magical beasts attacking at night?" Liang Xiaola's face paled when she heard that. Her eyes were filled with fear as she trembled all over. "What about you? Where are you going? Don't leave me behind at all, or I'll definitely be eaten by those vicious magical beasts." Liang Xiaola followed up with a question. She stared at Jianchen and Tai Ta nervously, afraid that they would leave her behind and run off. Jianchen sighed inside. He really had no way of dealing with the timid Liang Xiaola. Young ladies from noble families like her had never experienced much. They had grown up in a greenhouse, so they would lose their cool when they encountered danger. "Don't worry, we won't go far. We'll just rest under that tree," said Jianchen. Liang Xiaola finally felt some comfort when she heard that. However, the lingering fear in her heart did not disappear. Chapter 36. In the middle of the night, Jianchen and Tai Ta sat under a tree and cultivated quietly. Their torches had already been extinguished. Liang Xiaola sat on a branch that was 5 or 6 meters above the ground behind them. She looked around nervously. Whenever the roar of a wild beast rang out in the night sky, she would become nervous for half a day. How could she dare to sleep in an environment like this? How could she sleep? Liang Xiaola's bright eyes constantly glanced past Jianchen and Tai Ta, who were cultivating under the tree. It seemed like she was keeping an eye on the 2 of them. She did not want to see the 2 people she had encountered after so much difficulty run away right under her nose at a critical moment like this. She would lose her only protection. At this moment, a gentle breeze blew by, causing the surrounding trees to rustle. At the same time, Jianchen, who had been cultivating under a tree, suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, a sharp gaze shot out from his eyes, directly towards the depths of the forest. Afterwards, he stood up from the ground with a bang, tightly gripping the rusty metal rod in his hand. Liang Xiaola stared at Jianchen, who had suddenly stood up in confusion. For some reason, she suddenly felt an intense sense of unease from the depths of her heart. "Hey, what's wrong?" Liang Xiaola whispered and asked carefully. She did not dare to speak loudly in an environment like this, afraid that she would attract the attention of a magical beast. Jianchen did not answer Liang Xiaola. Instead, he looked at Tai Ta, who was still cultivating, and called out, "Tai Ta, wake up. There's an attack from a magical beast." What did you say? There's an attack from a magical beast? Liang Xiaola paled in fright. Her face became extremely pale in an instant, devoid of blood. Due to excessive fear, her entire body began to tremble. Tai Ta was cultivating, but he still maintained a sliver of vigilance towards the outside world even though he was cultivating in an environment like this. As a result, when he heard Genshin's words, he immediately stopped cultivating and stood up. He picked up the axe and carried it on his shoulder. "Chang Shoten, where are the magical beasts?" Iron Tower looked around. Not only did he not find any traces of magic beasts, he did not even hear any movement. Genshin slowly turned his head and stared around sternly. He said with a deep voice, "Tai Ta, be careful this time. It's not just one magical beast attacking. It's a group. A bunch." Tai Ta's nonchalant expression immediately vanished when he heard that. It was replaced with a stern expression. What? The group? No way. Hey, I beg you, don't scare me, okay?" Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, cried and pleaded. She would rather take these words as Genshin's threat to her. Genshin frowned, then shouted at Liang Xiaola, who was shouting in the tree, "Be quiet. Are you trying to lure all the magical beasts over here?" Without a doubt, Genshin's words were extremely effective on Liang Xiaola. Liang Xiaola immediately covered his mouth with his hand and forced himself not to make a sound. "Changyang Shoten, how many magical beasts do you think there are this time?" Tai Ta asked with a deep voice. "There's a lot. There's at least a dozen. They've made their preparations and have already surrounded us," Genshin said sternly. Tai Ta's expression became more and more stern when he heard that. If there was only one magical beast, he could deal with it alone. If there were 2 or 3 of them, it would naturally not be a problem for the 2 of them. However, there were over a dozen of them now. Even with Tai Ta's pride, he could not help but feel a headache coming on. However, when Liang Xiaola heard Genshin's words, her pale face became even paler. Her mind was completely filled with fear. Only a single thought circled around in her head: "It's over, it's over. We're dead for sure this time. We definitely won't be able to survive." As the weeds in the distance rustled gently, green specks of light appeared before their eyes one after another. They were everywhere. There were many specks of light, close to 50 of them. As the specks of light drew closer, Genshin and Tai Ta finally managed to see clearly. These specks of light were actually the eyes of magical beasts. There were over 20 of them. These are Class 1 Azure Wolves. "Tai Ta, run to a tree if you can't hold on any longer," Genshin said sternly as he stared sternly at the 20 or so wolves in the surroundings. Tai Ta stared around viciously. He waved his huge axe viciously and roared out heroically, "Don't worry, Changyang Shoten. Aren't there just 20 or so Class 1 magical beasts? I guarantee that they won't be able to return alive." When she heard that there were more than 20 magical beasts attacking this time, Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, paled in fright. At this moment, no matter how confident she was in Genshin and Tai Ta, she definitely did not believe that 2 people who were not even saints could survive the attack of more than 20 magical beasts, unless a teacher from the academy came to save them. "Teacher, where are you? Quickly come and save us." Liang Xiaola's face was filled with fear as she looked at the pairs of green eyes around her. She begged in a low voice. Now, she could only hope that the teachers of the academy would come and save them. Unfortunately, there were so many magical beasts here. She was so timid that she didn't even dare to shout out loud. She was afraid that she would attract the attention of the magical beasts. The 20 or so wolves slowly approached Genshin and Tai Ta. They stared at the 2 of them coldly and emotionlessly with their green eyes. They only stopped when they were only 5 meters away from Genshin and Tai Ta. Genshin and Tai Ta both gripped their weapons tightly. Even though they were surrounded by over 20 Class 1 magical beasts, they did not show any fear at all. "Awoo!" Suddenly, one of the green wolves howled at the sky, followed by the other 20 green wolves howling at the same time. Their howls shook the sky, and their momentum was tremendous. The howls of the 20 green wolves overlapped perfectly, forming a powerful sound wave that spread out in all directions. Hearing this incomparably magnificent howl, Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, was scared out of his wits. He almost fell down from the tree. His whole body trembled even more violently. There was no trace of blood on his little face. It was so pale. 5 kilometers away from Jianchen and Tai Ta, a middle-aged man was resting on a tree with his eyes closed. However, when he heard the howls of the wolves, his expression changed slightly. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the howls. Oh no, it's actually a pack of wolves. There are at least a dozen of them. Looks like someone is in danger. The middle-aged man's expression suddenly became incomparably dignified. His hands touched the tree trunk, and his body immediately floated down the tree. After that, without stopping for a moment, he ran in the direction of the wolf pack's howls with the fastest speed he could reach. I hope I can still make it. The middle-aged man's face was full of anxiety. He had already raised his speed to the limit. The students in the second area had yet to reach the Saint Realm, so they had no chance of winning against a pack of green wolves that were all Class 1 magical beasts. At the same time, 3 people in 3 other directions immediately put down what they were doing and ran towards the wolves as fast as they could when they heard the howls of the wolves. The howls seemed to be a signal for the wolves to attack. Afterwards, over 20 wolves charged towards Jianchen and Tai Ta at the same time. Go die! Tai Ta roared angrily. He swung the huge axe in his hand with all his might and swung it at the incoming wolves. The sharp edge of the axe made an ear-piercing sound as it cut through the air. Bang! The Cyan wolf at the very front was directly struck by Iron Tower's axe, leaving a huge gash on its body. The Cyan wolf's clumsy body was directly sent flying far away. Although the Cyan wolf was a rank 1 magical beast, it still couldn't withstand Iron Tower's terrifying strength. Tai Ta crazily swung the huge axe in his hand. The huge axe, which weighed more than 100 pounds, was held in his hand as if it was weightless. Every wolf that approached him was ruthlessly sent flying by his huge axe. Not a single one was able to get close to his body. Almost every wolf that was sent flying by him was left with a terrible wound on their body. However, because the skin of these wolves was very tough, even with Tai Ta's astonishing strength, it was impossible for him to kill a wolf so easily. Jianchen's eyes immediately sharpened when he saw the wolves pounce towards him. He took a step forward and stabbed his iron rod towards the throat of the wolf closest to him. Spurt! After some resistance, the iron rod finally pierced through the wolf's skin and entered its throat. Afterwards, Jianchen immediately pulled out the iron rod. At the same time, he slightly moved his feet and dodged the wolves that were pouncing towards him. The wolf that had its throat pierced by Jianchen fell to the ground powerlessly. Its 4 limbs continuously scratched the ground as it desperately struggled to get up. However, no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't stand up. Bright red blood continuously flowed out from its throat. The throat was a fatal weakness for every living creature. Even magical beasts were no exception. Now that the wolf's throat had been pierced, its life was quickly slipping away. At this moment, it was only struggling on the verge of death. It simply wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Jianchen relied on his nimble movements to move through the pack of wolves. He used the tip of the iron rod in his hand to continuously leave wounds on the wolves' bodies. Even though he was surrounded by more than 10 wolves, Jianchen relied on his unpredictable movements to move around with ease. Those wolves' sharp fangs and claws simply couldn't hit Jianchen. Every time there was danger, Jianchen would always be able to narrowly dodge. The battle only lasted for a few breaths of time. 3 wolves had their throats pierced by Jianchen and lost their ability to fight. At this moment, they were powerlessly lying on the ground, struggling on their deathbed. There was only one outcome waiting for them, and that was death. As for the remaining wolves that surrounded Jianchen, many of them were injured. However, the wounds were either fatal or at the joints of their limbs. Jianchen constantly moved through the pack of wolves. The iron rod in his hand continuously stabbed out. His movements were incomparably fast, but also boundlessly elegant. It was as if he was singing and dancing, and not experiencing a battle to the death. On the other side, Tai Ta constantly roared. His huge axe that weighed over 50 kilograms was swung so hard that even water couldn't penetrate it. Gradually, illusions began to appear. The dozen or so wolves surrounding him were constantly sent flying by his attacks. Almost every wolf had a few abnormally terrifying wounds on their bodies. However, these wounds were all left behind by Tai Ta's random attacks, so they weren't fatal to the wolves. Chapter 37. In just a few seconds, another wolf had died at Genshin's hands, while countless more were injured. Liang Xiaola did not hear Genshin and Tai Ta's cries at all as she hid in the tree. Instead, she constantly heard the pained cries of the wolves. Out of curiosity, she suppressed her fear and opened her eyes to look down. However, her eyes widened in the next moment. She stared at Tai Ta and Genshin, who were fighting the wolves, in disbelief. She was so shocked that she could not even speak. Every time Tada swung his axe, he would send a green wolf flying far away. As he continued to swing his axe, not a single green wolf could get close to him. Moreover, those green wolves were covered with terrifying wounds and were dripping with blood. As for Genshin, he quickly moved through the pack of wolves, constantly changing his range to dodge the attacks that came from all directions. As he stabbed out with his staff, he would constantly add bloody holes to the wolves around him. Liang Xiaola was unable to catch his movements clearly with her eyes. Most of the time, she could only see a blurry shadow flash by. Liang Xiaola, who had never experienced any bloody scenes before, was shaken to the core by what happened below. After understanding the situation below, Liang Xiaola's fear gradually faded. Even so, she still trembled slightly. After all, this was the first time she had experienced such a bloody scene. No matter who it was, they would not be able to adapt to it. At this moment, a wolf took advantage of Tai Ta's carelessness and bit his right shoulder viciously. Its sharp teeth pierced deeply into Tai Ta's flesh. Immediately, blood flowed from Tai Ta's shoulder. The intense pain caused Tai Ta's facial muscles to twitch slightly. Looking at the wolf that was still biting his shoulder, a trace of madness flashed through Tai Ta's eyes. The expression on his face instantly became ferocious. He immediately threw away the axe in his hand and grabbed the wolf's head with his right hand, forcibly pulling it off his right arm. Immediately, the wolf's sharp teeth left a deep bite mark on Tai Ta's right arm, and its huge mouth finally left Tai Ta's arm. Tai Ta's hands tightly pinched the two halves of the green wolf's mouth. The veins on his arms bulged, and his entire arm quickly swelled up. He suddenly let out a furious roar and exerted force with both arms. In the end, the green wolf let out a miserable howl and directly tore the green wolf's mouth into two halves. Immediately, bright red blood splashed out from the green wolf's body and sprayed onto Tai Ta's body, dyeing him red. Iron Tower's actions deterred the surrounding green wolves. Looking at the two halves of their companion's corpse, the surrounding green wolves all stopped in their tracks. There was a clear trace of fear in their eyes. However, Tai Ta did not plan on letting the wolves go. He tossed away the corpse in his hand and grabbed the axe stuck in the ground, directly chopping at the head of a wolf. The wolf tilted its head slightly and dodged Tai Ta's axe. Afterwards, it let out a short howl at the sky and lunged at Tai Ta with its huge mouth wide open. The fear in the eyes of the other wolves immediately vanished when they heard the howl. They all bared their teeth and lunged at Tai Ta once more. Tai Ta directly kicked the wolf in the stomach and sent it flying far away. Afterwards, he swung his axe and the sharp edge of the axe directly landed on the neck of a wolf beside him. Immediately, the wolf's head flew high into the air. Blood spurted out from the wolf's neck like a fountain. Tai Ta did not stop at all after chopping off the wolf's head. He immediately swung his axe to block the incoming wolves. Pang! A wolf could not dodge in time and was viciously struck in the head by Tai Ta's axe. The wolf's head was directly chopped into pieces by Tai Ta's axe, and it died instantly. After being injured, Tai Ta clearly became even more ferocious. In the blink of an eye, he had already killed 2 wolves. On the other side, Genshin was also fiercely fighting with more than 10 wolves. At this time, a wolf leaped high into the air and pounced at Genshin, whose back was facing Genshin. At this time, Genshin suddenly turned around and stared sharply at the wolf in the air. The iron rod in his hand stabbed out like lightning, directly piercing the wolf's abdomen and piercing through its heart. After this attack, Genshin immediately withdrew his iron rod. His body slightly swayed and he had already left this position. Just as Genshin left, several wolves pounced at the position where he had just been standing. The wolf that had its heart pierced by Genshin's iron rod let out a miserable cry. It fell to the ground and did not get up. Then, its entire body slightly sobbed and quickly stopped breathing. The battle continued. As time passed, more and more wolves died at the hands of Genshin and Taita. Gradually, the pressure that the two faced quickly decreased. When the iron rod in his hand stabbed into the throat of the last wolf, Genshin had already killed a dozen wolves that had attacked him. However, Genshin's clothes were not stained with too much blood because of this. Genshin looked in Taita's direction and saw that there were still 7 or 8 wolves there. However, the wolves were already covered in vicious wounds and bathed in blood. Taita's tattered clothes that had already been pierced by the thorns became even more tattered, almost becoming strips of cloth. His clothes no longer covered his body, revealing Taita's firm chest. Even one of his pants had been completely torn apart. There were many bloody wounds on Taita's body as well. Genshin did not hesitate in the slightest. Holding the iron rod, he rushed towards the wolves that were besieging Taita. His hands were extremely fast as he stabbed towards the throats of 8 wolves. Because these wolves were all heavily injured by Taita, and because they had been fighting with Taita for so long, they were a little exhausted. Therefore, Genshin killed them very easily, almost effortlessly. In just 8 strikes, he had ended their lives, each strike accurately hitting the wolf's throat. When all the attacking wolves were killed, Genshin could not help but feel a little out of breath. After all, his current strength was still too weak. Fighting with so many magic beasts that were stronger than him at one time was not a small consumption for him. Taita let out a long breath. Looking at the corpses all over the ground, a trace of a happy smile appeared on his face. Although he had just experienced a difficult battle, there was not the slightest trace of fatigue on his face. Instead, his spirit was trembling. Changyang Shoten, we've killed all the Class 1 magical beasts that attacked us. Taita's voice was filled with excitement. This was the first time he had killed so many Class 1 magical beasts since he was young, so he could not help but feel rather excited. Genshin smiled. Looking at the wounds on Taita, he asked, "You're injured. Are they serious?" Taita lowered his head to look at the wounds on his body. He did not seem to care at all. It's fine, it's fine. Although the bites hurt a lot, they're all superficial wounds. Hee, I've always been thick-skinned since I was young. Regular beasts can't hurt me at all. Hearing that, Genshin nodded in agreement. He immediately stopped worrying. He had experienced Taita's toughness firsthand. It was not an exaggeration to say that Taita's body was as tough as steel. It was quite impressive that the wolves could bite through Taita's skin. "Oh right, Changyang Shoten, are you injured?" Taita glanced at Genshin with concern. Genshin shook his head and smiled. "Don't worry, those wolves can't hurt me." With that, Genshin shifted his gaze slightly and looked at the bushes up ahead. He called out, "Haven't you seen enough after watching for so long? I wonder how long you're going to hide." Taita was slightly surprised by Genshin's strange voice. A sliver of doubt appeared in his eyes, but he soon returned to his senses. Immediately, his eyes shone brightly as he looked in the direction Genshin was looking at. He gripped his axe tightly with both hands. "Who's hiding there? Come out, or I'll cut you down with my axe," Taita roared out. With that, the bushes up ahead began to rustle slightly. With a rustle, 4 figures gradually appeared before Genshin and Taita. Taita immediately became alert when he saw the 4 black figures. However, Genshin did not move at all. He only had a faint smile on his face. Although he could not see their faces clearly due to the darkness of the night, Genshin had already guessed their identities. The 4 black figures stopped when they were only 2 meters away from Genshin and Taita. At this time, Jianchen and Tai Ta could clearly see their faces. They were clearly two middle-aged men, an old man and a middle-aged woman around 30 years old. At this moment, the four of them were completely shocked. Their expressions were blank as if they had seen something unbelievable. For teachers, it's actually you. Tai Ta clearly recognized the four of them and called out in surprise. The four of them recovered very quickly, but a sliver of deep shock still remained in their eyes. Changyang Shoten, no wonder there's a rumor in the academy that you can defeat a saint in the air. I didn't believe it at first, but it looks like the rumor is true. Your strength really is not as simple as it seems on the surface. You can kill over a dozen Class 1 magical beasts by yourself with a broken metal rod. Even students who have condensed saint weapons are nowhere close to your strength. The old man looked at Jianchen with a smile. His voice was filled with admiration. Jianchen smiled. You're too kind, teacher. I'm not as powerful as you make me out to be. These magical beasts may be Class 1 magical beasts, but their attacks are all weak. If I really do come across a powerful Class 1 magical beast, I probably won't be able to handle them so easily. Hearing that, the old man looked at Jianchen with a sliver of admiration. He then turned to Tai Ta and smiled. Tai Ta, you're very powerful as well. No wonder the headmaster thinks highly of you and accepted you as a disciple. Tai Ta rubbed his head and smiled foolishly. He was immediately at a loss for words. Elder Yun, it looks like the four of us have come for nothing this time. With the two of them together, what magical beast in the second zone can harm them? At this moment, the middle-aged woman in her 30s chuckled. Chapter 38. By the way, Changyang Shoten, how did you discover us? One of the middle-aged men asked, his tone full of doubt. Hearing this, the other three people suddenly became interested and looked at Jianchen. The four of them were also very curious about how Jianchen discovered them hiding in the bushes. This was because they did not make any sound while hiding in the bushes. Logically speaking, it was impossible for Jianchen, who was so much weaker than them, to discover them. Jianchen smiled and said, Actually, I knew when you four teachers came. What? You discovered us as soon as we came? How is that possible? The woman exclaimed in disbelief. The other three people also looked at Jianchen in disbelief. Jianchen said, Although I was fighting with the wolves, I was always paying attention to the movements around me. Otherwise, how could I always avoid the attacks from all directions at the most critical moment? Hearing this, the four teachers nodded and agreed with Jianchen's explanation in their hearts. Jianchen continued to explain, Teachers, although you hid in the side and did not make any sound, you made too much noise when you came. You did not hide your figures at all, so I discovered you immediately. Only with that did the four of them come to a realization. The old man continued to praise, Impressive, impressive. Changyang Shangtian, I can't help but admire you now. You're even more outstanding than we imagined. Back then, when I was your age, I wasn't even half as capable as you. At this point, the old man paused and continued, Since you are no longer in danger, then we should leave. After all, we still have to protect the other students. With that, the four teachers did not have the slightest reluctance and turned to leave. Wait. Jianchen suddenly called out to the four teachers, then pointed at Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, and said, Teachers, can you help send this student out? She is too timid and is really not suitable to survive here. Hearing this, the elder frowned and thought for a while before saying, That's not a problem. However, if she leaves now, even if she pays 2 Class 1 monster cores, it will still be considered a failure. After all, she hasn't stayed here for 3 days. No, I won't go out. I must stay here for 3 days before I go out. Liang Xiaola's voice came from the tree. Then, she jumped down from the branch that was 5 or 6 meters above the ground. Her footsteps shuffled as she walked over the corpses of the green wolves and arrived in front of Jianchen and Liang Xiaola. Hey, now that there are 4 teachers leading you out, there are no demonic beasts that can harm you. Why aren't you going out? Tai Ta's tone was rather displeased. Liang Xiaola was just too timid. She would make a fuss as soon as she saw a demonic beast, which annoyed Tai Ta greatly. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta a little timidly and said softly, I don't want to go out. Are you not afraid of the demonic beasts? Tai Ta asked curiously. Since you're afraid, then why don't you go out? Aren't you guys here? Tai Ta, who had a simple personality and was not good with words, was immediately at a loss for words. Jianshan looked at Liang Xiaola a little helplessly and tried to persuade her. Student Liang Xiaola, you should go out with the 4 teachers. There are too many demonic beasts in this forest. It's not suitable for you to stay here. Liang Xiaola suddenly became pitiful. Perhaps she also understood that Jianshan was the backbone of the two, so she looked at Jianshan and begged, Senior, please let me go with you guys. Because this is the first time I've seen a demonic beast and the first time I've come to this kind of place, I can't help but feel a little scared. But I promise you, I won't randomly shout when I see a demonic beast in the future, okay? After seeing the strength of Jianshan and Tai Ta, Liang Xiaola no longer had to worry about encountering any danger by their side. Moreover, she heard very clearly that even the 4 teachers in front of her said that the demonic beasts in the 2nd district were no longer a threat to them. With such a good protective umbrella, Liang Xiaola naturally would not give up so easily. Jianshan immediately had a headache. Liang Xiaola, a spoiled noble lady, would definitely be a huge burden by their side. They would have to take care of her while fighting against the demonic beasts. Changyang Shoten, with the strength of the 2 of you, there are no demonic beasts in the 2nd district that can pose a threat to you. Why don't you bring her along? Students should help each other. Moreover, this is also a test for the 2 of you. The middle-aged woman said with a smile. Jianshan sighed inwardly. Since the teachers had suggested that the 2 of them bring Liang Xiaola along, he could not find any reason to refuse. Since Jianshan had agreed, even if Tai Ta was dissatisfied, he would not say anything. In fact, after this day of interaction, Tai Ta had already faintly regarded Jianshan as the backbone in his heart. Tai Ta would not reject anything that Jianshan decided on. After all, not only was Jianshan more intelligent than Tai Ta, but his strength and survival experience in the forest were also much better than Tai Ta's. It could be said that Jianshan had convinced Tai Ta wholeheartedly in all aspects. After the 4 teachers left, Jianshan and Tai Ta ignored Liang Xiaola and went to clean up the corpses of the wolves. After all, there were over 20 Class 1 monster cores. They would not let them go to waste. Since the monster cores of the wolves were in their brains, Jianshan and Tai Ta had to smash the heads of the wolves if they wanted to retrieve the monster cores. This incomparably cruel and bloody scene made Liang Xiaola's face turn pale. However, after experiencing what had just happened, perhaps Liang Xiaola's mentality had changed slightly. She actually did not turn her head away. She forcefully suppressed the fear in her heart and stared straight at Jianshan and Tai Ta's actions. It seemed like she was learning from them. The night quickly passed. Since the attack of the wolves, not a single magical beast came to harass Jianshan and the others. When the first light of dawn slowly rose from the horizon, Jianshan, who was sitting cross-legged under a tree, also slowly opened his eyes. He then stood up from the ground and casually moved his slightly stiff body. Just as Jianshan stood up, Tai Ta also opened his eyes and stood up from the ground after hearing the movement. Although the 2 of them were cultivating, they maintained a trace of vigilance towards the outside world in this environment. As long as there was any movement in the wind, it would not be able to escape the 2 of them. Tai Ta, go find some dry branches to start a fire. I'll go clean up the magical beast meat. It's time to make some breakfast. Jianshan said indifferently. Oh. Tai Ta did not have any objections. He turned around and walked into the forest to look for dry branches. Soon, Tai Ta came back with a bundle of dry branches. At this time, Jianshan also prepared a large piece of bloody magical beast meat. The meat was taken from the wolf he killed last night. Since there was no water here, the meat was not washed. He directly skewered it with a wooden stick and began to roast it over the fire. Not long after, the magic beast meat on the fire emitted a fragrant smell. Although no seasoning was used, the quality of the magic beast meat was already very high. Even if no seasoning was used, the taste was very good. Moreover, the higher the level of the magic beast, the more delicious the meat was. Moreover, it had great benefits for the body. It was said that eating the meat of a 5th-rank magic beast could also improve one's strength to a limited extent. Perhaps because she smelled the fragrance of the magical beast meat, Liang Xiaola, who had fallen asleep at some point in time, slowly woke up. She then jumped down from the tree. A height of 5 or 6 meters was nothing to Liang Xiaola, who had at least 80% of Saint Force. Wow, it smells so good. Liang Xiaola skipped over to the fire. She could not help but gulp as she looked at the golden-colored magical beast meat dripping with oil. Although she had eaten a lot of exotic delicacies, she had never eaten such wild game before. After all, she had eaten meat every day for over 10 years. But when she suddenly changed her taste, even if it was cabbage, she would feel that it was much more fragrant than those delicacies. Tai Ta looked at Liang Xiaola with some dissatisfaction and muttered softly, "You were crying and screaming when you came here last night. You've forgotten so quickly. I hope you won't cry when we meet the magical beasts later." Tai Ta's voice was very soft and vague. Other than himself, even Genshin could not hear what he was muttering. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta curiously. "Tai Ta, what are you talking about?" Liang Xiaola already knew the names of Genshin and the others from the 4 teachers last night. It's nothing." Tai Ta waved his hand. From the looks of it, he seemed to have a guilty conscience. Liang Xiaola did not mind. She looked at Genshin and Tai Ta and smiled. "No wonder you're so strong, able to kill over 20 Class 1 magical beasts with just the 2 of you. So you're Tai Ta and Changyang Shoten. I'm really lucky to have met you." Right now, Liang Xiaola looked like a completely different person from last night. It had only been one night, but she seemed to have already thrown yesterday's matter to the back of her mind. At this moment, there was not the slightest trace of fear brought about by the magical beast on her face. Genshin picked up the roasted magical beast meat, tore off a piece and threw it to Liang Xiaola. "There are a lot of magical beasts in this forest, and we won't go out until 3 days have passed. Aren't you afraid?" Liang Xiaola took the magical beast meat, put it in her mouth and gently bit it, then said, "Although I am a little scared, but I believe that I will not be afraid when I get used to it, and the 2 of you are not much older than me, but last night in the face of more than 20 ferocious green wolves, not only did you not show the slightest fear, but you also killed all those green wolves. This is much better than those boys, humph, those useless boys, 5 of them couldn't beat a magical beast, and as a result, I and my good sisters were separated." Liang Xiaola suddenly stood up and said loudly, "I've decided now. I must take advantage of these 2 days to learn from the 2 seniors." Hearing this, Genshin nodded secretly. Liang Xiaola's words had obtained Genshin's initial approval. Although she was timid and very afraid of magical beasts, these were not important. What was important was that she could change and learn. After all, no one knew everything the moment they were born. They could only rely on themselves to learn everything. Of course, Genshin was an exception. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best wuxia and xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.